This recording will describe the questions and demonstrate the functionality associated with Screen 6.0 sterilization of components and equipment by irradiation in the sterilization process validation QBR. If any components or equipment used in the drug product manufacturing are sterilized by irradiation, you should fill out section 6.0. Begin by filling out information on each relevant sterilization load in section 6.1. Click the green plus sign to add a load. Enter your load identifier. Next, provide a description of the load for validation cycles. If for any reason the load for production cycles is different from the load for validation cycle, both should be described. This should include a description of the component, equipment load, and the arrangement within the sterilizer. Summary data from cycle development studies to support this justification can be provided in Module 3. Next, indicate the steps to be taken if you do not have a full load for sterilization. A diagram indicating the monitoring locations of the dosimeter and the biological indicator, if they're used in the dose mapping studies, should be attached as a PDF file. Choose the file and upload it. You can also choose a file that has already been uploaded in the submission. Next, you should provide justifications for the monitoring locations and the number of dosimeters, as well as if used BIs for the dose mapping studies. This should include information to show that the monitoring locations for validation and routine production adequately monitor the hardest to sterilize locations within the load. Summary data from cycle development studies to support this justification may be provided in Module 3. The next question asks what type of equipment or containers are being sterilized in this load. After that, state what type of sterilization is used for the load. There are currently two choices in the e-submitter form, e-beam or gamma irradiation. If a radiation source other than these two is used, such as X-ray, you can contact CVM on how to enter the information. Let's select gamma irradiation as an example. If you reference a Type 5 master file for the irradiation facility, choose Yes. And select the master file from the drop-down menu. All master files you entered in section 1.1 will appear here. The next question asks if you use a biological indicator to monitor the irradiation process. Select accordingly. We'll choose yes in this example. The final question asks if the sterilization cycle is a bioburden based. Typically, if the target dose is 25 kg or higher, it is considered an overkill cycle, in which case you can select no. Provide a description of the strategy you use to establish the sterilization dose. For overkill cycles, fill out section 6.1.1 facility information, 6.1.6 validation and production parameters, and section 6.1.8 validation run results. As you see, they become editable when you select no under the bioburden-based cycle question. For facility information, enter the name, full address, contact information of the sterilization facility, as well as its current FDA inspection status. You can also upload the information you have entered on this page to the establishment book for future use. If you already entered the information into the establishment book, you can click here to download this information. In section 6.1.6, validation and production parameters, enter the minimum and maximum irradiation doses for both validation studies and routine product productions. Enter the number of BIs used in the validation if BIs are relevant. Fill out section 6.1.7 biological indicators if BIs are used. Here you can enter the species, type. It could be suspension or strip. We'll use suspension as an example. And the source of the indicator. If it is commercial BI, you need to provide the manufacturer's name, lot number, d-value, and population of the BI provided by the manufacturer, as well as your own confirmatory results of the BI. You should also provide a copy of the manufacturer's COA for the BI in Module 3. If the BI is made in-house, manufacturer's information does not need to be provided. Next, validation run results in section 6.1.8. After providing the specification of the minimum and maximum doses and the specification of the BIs if they're used, you can enter run results. Note that the specification can be saved and imported from the data book, but not the results. For run results, enter the run date, minimum and maximum doses, as well as the results of the BIs if they're used. A minimum of 3 successful validation runs is typically reported to validate the sterilization process unless an alternate validation approach has been discussed in other parts of the application. Thereafter, data from a single run can be reported if additional requalification have been performed since the load was initially validated. If initial validation data are superseded by more recent requalification or revalidation data, the 3 most recent runs or a combination of initial validation and requalification runs within the last 3 years may be provided to support the irradiation process. Justification, including additional data if needed, should be provided to support any changes made to the irradiation load or bracketing strategy during this time period. If you use a bioburden-based cycle, you can make this selection in section 6.1. Let's create another load. You can enter up to 10 loads. If you have more than 10 loads to enter, you may contact CVM on how to provide this information. There are 2 ways to view the loads. We're in the detail view right now. Here you can flip loads by clicking these 2 arrows. You can also view the loads as a list. Let's go to detail view of the bioburden stopper load again. Scroll all the way down and we will select e-beam this time as an example. For question, is this a bioburden-based cycle? Select yes. The next question is a checklist question to remind you that the bioburden method and validation information should be submitted in other information section of the submission. Check this box after you confirm this has been done. The last question asks what method is used to establish the sterilization dose. Depending on your answer, different subsections will become editable. If ISO 11137/2 method 1 is used to establish the sterilization dose, fill out section 6.1.2 and 6.1.5. In section 6.1.2, first question asks what the proposed sterilization assurance level for the finished product is. Next, identify the batch numbers of the product lots used to determine the bioburden. State how many product items were selected from each of the batches to determine bioburden. Then enter the batch average bioburden for each of the 3 batches and the overall average bioburden for all the product items. If a correction factor is applied to the bioburden calculation, you need to state what the correction factor is and how it was determined. The next 2 questions ask you to enter the verification dose you have selected and how many product items were irradiated at the verification dose. Then provide how many product item units were positive for the sterility test. Based on your data, enter your proposed routine sterilization dose in the last box. Now let's move to section 6.1.5, dose auditing, dose verification, requalification. Enter the frequency of dose auditing in the first blank and how many product samples are tested for bioburden for dose auditing. Then provide a description of how dose verification is performed. The last question asks about the actions to be taken if the dose verification fails. You can provide your answer in the text box or in the free-form text dialog window, which can track the number of words and provide bigger space for typing. Now let's go back to section 6.1. And choose VDmax for this example. Instead of 6.1.2, you need to fill out section 6.1.3, method VDmax. And section 6.1.4, dose verification. In section 6.1.3, first select the targeted VDmax dose, and then identify the batch numbers of the lots used to determine the bioburden. In section 6.1.4, dose verification, answer how many product items were selected from each of the batches to determine the bioburden. Then answer the question, what is the batch average bioburden for each batch tested and the overall average bioburden for all the product items? If the bioburden is very low, pooling of 10 units is possible to determine the average bioburden. If a single batch average bioburden is 2 or more times greater than the average overall bioburden, use the highest batch average bioburden. Same as before, if a correction factor is applied, you need to provide information regarding the correction factor. Next, enter the verification dose delivered and provide how many product items were irradiated at the verification dose. Provide the sterility test results after irradiation. Enter the number of product units that had growth during the sterility test. If confirmatory verification dose experiments is required, enter the dose delivered and how many product items were irradiated at the verification dose, and how many product items were positive for growth after sterility testing. If neither the ISO method or VDmax are used to establish the sterilization dose, you have the option to describe other method. After section 6.1 is completed, you can move to section 6.2, requalification. Section 6.2 only needs to be filled out once, despite how many loads you have entered in 6.1. First, describe under what circumstances do you plan to repeat the dose mapping study. Examples include changes to the load, target dose not achieved, among others. And then provide a description of the requalification strategy, which should include what loads are used for requalification studies and frequency of requalification. If a worst case load is utilized, justification for this approach should be provided here. This should include what loads are covered by the approach and a discussion of the load densities. That's the end of screen 6.0.